6 times.
Who knows? This episode of The Backpack brought to you by Yeti Mugs. Go to cbrogan.me/Yeti Mug and fill yourself up with delicious Yeti goodness. I was looking for where my Yeti mug is. I don't have one. I got a ball jar. Also brought to you by Ball. Hey, Carrie, glad to see you. Thanks again for being part of this. Today we got Jason Miller and Dave Landau. So we have a kick-ass show today. I want to get your take on that. What do you think? Backpack.
It'll never not be funny to me.
I love just stuffing it where it just anywhere, just like that. So
that's what you said.
Scott, Chloe, Fred Faulkner IV. Good to see you.
So I'm really excited about this because I think in the backpack we have a couple of things that Jason brings to the table. One is creativity, another is resourcefulness and persistence. Like he has gotten things done at big companies like LinkedIn and Microsoft that you would not have expected. Gotten them to take a different approach to content marketing. He also takes amazing concert photos, and I think his dedication to getting like the shot that he wants, it's that persistence, that grit that gets you to the next stage of your career. I just love him, and he's super fun.
Jason is ultra fun. Couldn't be any more jazzed, and he's joining us from Sussex. He's on the beaches of Sussex.
He's wicked classy. Yeah.
Classy Jason Miller. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. I'm in pure vacation mode. So, but glad to be here. Great to see your faces.
You know, when people think vacation, they think, let's go to the beaches of England. But
well, we don't have a whole lot of choice. I mean, the flights are with the family. We hop in a car, drive 2 hours down south. We're at the English Channel. So, and history is at our doorstep. So we're taking.
If I go 2 hours south, I'll be in Alabama. So I think I'll stay.
That's a vacation.
That part of Alabama. In northern Alabama, no beaches.
Carrie said it right on the nose, and I want to go right there first. You have had pretty kick-ass gigs. You know, you've worked at places like LinkedIn, you've worked at Microsoft, you've worked at all these like pretty cool shops where, you know, whatever the job was that you officially had, what we knew you as was this really interesting content guy that brought a lot more cachet to those places. How did you negotiate those? How did you put that together? What was it that allowed you the confidence to be real Jason Miller? And what was it like earlier before you were ready to be Jason Miller?
You know, it's a great question. I think, you know, it's about knowing who I am as a person. I have my passion for rock and roll, my passion for music, right? Spending 10 years, a decade plus in the music business and watching them sort of fight digital instead of embracing it. And it was just a weird journey. And so I had thought that I had lost sort of a decade of career trajectory, if you will. But it turns out everything I learned and loved about music kind of shaped how I viewed some very complex marketing situations. I mean, I started off at Marketo, you know, market automation, not the sexiest topic in the world. But the only way I could remember these really intricate sort of models and formulas was using rock and roll analogies. So Spinal Tap episodes, Ozzy Osbourne stories on thought leadership. And it just started to become a fun way to explain some marketing lessons along with some personal anecdotes of my own. And so I kind of just, you know, built that into everything I did. And I think if you really look hard and deep into the content that I produced and some of the stuff my team produced at the time, you'll always find an element of sort of Jerry Seinfeld, you know, a little wittiness, a little Axl Rose, a little bit edginess, and then you know, an element of just you can do this too. Here's how to do it. And, you know, this helpful sort of Jay Bear-esque kind of scenario. So that's it's really that simple. Like, learn how to do it, or like get a problem, find the best person who can solve that problem, figure out a way to interview them, and then take that idea, put your own spin on it, inject a little personality into it with your passion, and push it forward. And that's sort of what's worked for me.
How did you make it universally accessible for people? Because not everyone listens to the same music. Like, a lot of people think B2B marketers aren't that cool. It's perhaps unfair.
Well, it's not so much about the music. I mean, there's I think Chris can attest that not a lot of people listen to Slayer's Rain of Blood and think it's this masterpiece of music, which I do, or, you know, Twisted Sister and JJ French. We talk about him quite a bit. I love that man. I think he's brilliant. But it's more about the stories. Like, you don't have to love Ozzy Osbourne or Black Sabbath to hear the story. Everyone loves a comeback, right? Look at Robbie Downey Jr. Look at, I won't say Johnny Depp. He's going through hell right now. I hope what a crazy story. But everybody loves a comeback story. And I think in rock and roll, you see far more comeback stories in an inspirational way, supported by music. If you look at even A Star Is Born, I mean, as tragic as that ending is, it's also the music is told, or the story is told through the music. And I think that's really how you connect. I get chills thinking about that. Then you look at a story like Bohemian Rhapsody, and it's like the music, the story is told around the music, right? So it's two different scenarios. And then you look at Rocket Man, which I think is superior, is this adding this fun. And so the music is told through the story. The story is told through the music, and then it's just taken to this new level like no one's ever seen before, like a jolt of creativity. And so that's how I think about everything. I think, is this story or is this piece of content as great as it can be? What do we need to do to push it over the edge instead of just push it out the door? That's what I've always thought.
Chris, you look ready to throw down over that Bohemian Rhapsody versus Rocket Man thing.
Felt that one in my belly.
I saw it.
I've watched neither movie because I just watched the Show Must Go On documentary about Adam Lambert taking over and what Queen had to go through to get Adam Lambert as a frontman. And how there was really, I mean, there were all these people that kind of filled one piece of the Freddie Mercury story, but there was nobody like Lambert before and after, even though he's just like such a, different creature than what was Freddie Mercury. So I would argue on, but I didn't see Rocket Man yet, but I will say this. What I thought of when you said that whole storyline was we have to separate the man from the music in this one. But I watched a documentary, probably his last documentary, Michael Jackson. And one of the things he was saying on the stage was the first time I thought of him as a performer and a musician, as opposed to that weird guy who also has these songs. He was telling his dancing group, he goes, what I need you to be are extensions of me. So if I do this with my hand, I need you to stretch out my arm 20 feet in either direction with your dance move. So if I do this, you need to move across the stage like that. I went, oh, I didn't even get this. Like, I don't pay attention to choreography. It seems like that's what you did for brands with your adding rock and rock analogies to what Carrie pointed out could be fairly dry stuff.
Yeah, it's about finding your inspiration. I think you do your best work when you're inspired, and when you can show your team that you're working with what's possible and inspire them as well. I remember the first time I shared something from Scott Stratton or Ann Hanley to my team at LinkedIn, and they never heard of. I'm like, this is insane. Or Seth Godin's work. It's I think you just need to find what that inspiration is to keep you energized and have sort of and be able to see the end result, the vision, right? I think everyone knows me. They know I'm a music guy. I'm a big idea guy, and I like to build unexpected experiences that break through. And the other thing is, people look at LinkedIn and say, oh, you worked at LinkedIn for 6+ years or whatever. It's like, yeah, but when I was there, no one gave a crap about LinkedIn. Like no one, there was nothing in the feed. It was solely used to get a job. No one even knew what marketing solutions was. So I've always worked for the underdog. And we've always had to scratch and claw and be the scrappy marketer to really break through. So it was by the time I left LinkedIn, it was arguably, it was the hottest B2B platform and it was on fire. But in those early days, first 2-3 years, we had that was our only weapon to break through the clutter, was to be different. Facebook would make an announcement. Every evangelist would talk about it. We would make an announcement. We would have to scratch and claw for anybody to pay attention. For 2-3 years we did that, but we built something. But my team, we built the sophisticated marketer, this whole owned media empire, and it goes back to Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys, who said, "Don't hate the media, become the media." Jello Biafra talking about the media talking only about disco, and punk had to become outlandish and tell their own story. I brought that same approach in, and what you have now is one of the longest running content franchises, one of the most award-winning content franchises. The team is still going strong with it, but it's all about, I guess, building your own media empire. And again, that was inspired. It came through my love of punk rock and my love of these old stories from the 70s and 80s. So you just need to identify who you are, what you love, and how you can bring sort of inspiration from that and inject it into what you do. I think that's the opportunity.
Do you have any big
I got a feeling
disappointments,
that
Jason,
Dave's
like
gonna dig
a
on that
big
later.
idea that you didn't get to do that you still it's like still rattling around in there?
I have I have a blog post that I wrote that I just never got around to publishing yet. It's called My 5 Ideas That Didn't Make It. And there is one where I was was working on the first B2B science fiction novel. And it's a terrible scenario, but we actually scripted this thing out and had it ready to go. I'm going to share the initial draft of it. It was terrible. It was basically it came to me because I was for some reason my daughter was into Miley Cyrus, and I was looking at the Miley Cyrus Instagram, and she's kind of butchering the English language with all these like shortening words and lots of gibberish in her comments, whatever. And so I thought, oh, what happens 20, 30 years down the road when the English language is completely destroyed by people social just not typing out total words and making complete sentences. And so the premise is someone in the, in 50, 100 years in the future stumbles upon a copy of Everybody Writes from Manhandling. It's kind of burnt around the edges, and the rebellion picks it up and they run with it. They try to bring back and save the language.
Complete sentences, commas. Yeah.
And the other thing, there was 3 other ones. There's a couple I can't really talk about because it take too long. But I interviewed Gene Simmons. I got Gene Simmons on the Sophisticated Marketer podcast.
Son of a.
And the week before we were getting ready to push it live, he said something stupid in the media. And it's the only time the brand team ever told me that I couldn't do something. And they said, you can't publish it. But I have it ready to go. And I just got to dig it out and publish it. But anyway. Yeah, there was a lot of ideas, but the good ones always made it out the door. The other ones were just sort of a stepping ground, or it's just something we never threw anything away. I'll just say that.
Tell you what, if I had to hold interviews every time Chris said something a tinge off color, I would never publish a thing.
Yeah, and I love Gene Simmons. I can't believe he actually came on the show.
That's amazing to me. I'm very rarely envious of other people, but that's a good get. Gene Simmons. Oh,
he was promoting this new book on business, on entrepreneurship, and
that's how you get them.
Yes.
You get the authors.
Yep. That's the only way. That's how I got Alan Alda to come on. He had a book about communication that was applicable to marketing and business as much as anything else. And yeah, when they got stuff to promote, they'll come. But
even at I even tried to bring my team along for the ride. Like we had when I first started Microsoft, we started at brand sessions. Like we were relaunching the brand across Europe. So I wanted to bring someone who was launched a brand before. So my buddy Brian Cannon, who basically created the Oasis logo, the original Oasis logo, and did all the album artwork for the 90s. He came in and did a beautiful session talking about inspiration, design, and Glenn Matlock. I ran into Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols. He came by the office for lunch. As I mentioned, JJ French used to come by all the time. I love JJ. He would just tell me these stories, and but it's just, I'm living the dream, right? I got my rock and roll. I got my B2B marketing, which I never really signed up for the first place. But and then I have a team that that is empowered to do what's right for the business while we take intelligent risks, right? So it all worked out. Now, will I find that again? We'll see. I'm taking a little break right now, but we'll see.
You're in between. So you can grab the book, Welcome to the Funnel by Miller. You can also get a lot more Jason Miller at rockandrollcocktail.com. Also follow him on the Tweeters at Jason Miller CA, which turns you off from the idea that he may be in California, but he's not. He's in England.
But he was one.
He was once a man of California. Hey, Jason, thank you for coming by. Thanks for being part of the show today.
Enjoy the English
My
beaches.
pleasure. Always great to see your faces. I do have to run. I will
get
try
out of here.
If you don't see
I'm not
me.
talking to you anymore. Ready? Okay. See how that works?
I do. Yes.
I love it.
You've not relinquished control of the buttons, I had noticed.
I didn't touch as many buttons as I could have.
True.
I have to bring in David Landau. This is so amazing because Dave,
he's your Gene Simmons.
In his video, he was like Mr. Mohawk. So I don't know. Were you a punk guy growing up? You had to be.
I was, but I never got the mohawk until I had a midlife crisis. So right about then is when I finally shaved it in. I'd also like to state for the record, I hated Rocket Man and Bohemian Rhapsody, but I liked everything else he had to say.
I didn't see either one, but I was almost going to try Bohemian because I liked that Adam Lambert thing.
I'm a big Bryan Singer fan, just not of his movies.
I understand that.
I will watch
Completely
anything,
kidding.
any movie.
I hate them. Yeah, I won't. I don't like anything. I won't watch
None of the
anything
X-Men
that
films.
Yeah.
No, I love movies.
Oh.
I've seen terrible movies just because that was what was out at the time. I saw 5 movies one weekend. It's so much that I knew like what the trivia answers were when they were coming up in the theater. This is all pre-COVID, obviously. But
Yeah.
I'll watch any piece of crap movie that comes
Barry
out.
will sit through any movie is what I'm trying to tell you here, Dave.
I'm
Dave,
the
you're
same as you. I watch everything, and that's why I saw them both.
Because like, how do you know? It might be great.
Yeah.
You don't know.
so
Everybody
there's a
else
few
could be
people
wrong.
who don't yet know you. So I have to stick in here and do a quickie. And Dave Landau, I reached out to you on Twitter because you're a comic. You've done all kinds of different comedian stuff. You wrote a movie called King of Detroit based on your world. You're a guy who switches between Detroit and New York all the time. You've been out on the road for how many years now?
Probably about 15, 16.
15, 16 years. You were in Last Comic Standing, I think season 3, 4?
3
One of the
and
seasons?
7, one of them. Yeah, one of them. A couple of them.
And you have that in common with a guy that I used to work with his mom, Gary Gulman. Gary Gulman.
I like Gary.
He's a sweetheart. One of the very few guys in comedy who never said a dirty word for a million years. And I think something finally broke and his mom finally let him say bad words. So he says,
I think it was a heckler.
Oh.
Yeah.
It was just him and Sinbad for a long time. Not saying anything bad.
Yeah. You do not speak clean per se on your shows.
No.
I want to start kind of in media res that way. I want to start with the thing that turned me on was Comedy Central does. It's amazing that Comedy Central does it. It's like Adult Swim. You kind of keep looking at the logo and then keep looking. It's like, how did they do this? But they have this show called This Is Not Happening, which are at least ostensibly true stories told by comics. And some are absolute annoyingly, like, it's just their act. And some of them are a blend. And yours was very well put together as a story about a wolf man. So I guess if you want to kind of sum the story up a little bit for people, I want to then ask you some questions.
I bet Dave loves this. Go ahead, just perform for us.
No, not do the show.
Entertain me.
You could give a précis.
Right, just take it from the top.
Well, I was born in 1982. Now, I'm a recovering alcoholic and addict, and the story begins where I was 17 and I beer bonged a fifth, like the funnel put onto a plastic tubing, and I was already on pills and high and drunk at the time, so survival was pretty miraculous. And when I bonged it, like I talked about it in the show, I tap danced for a few minutes, lit a cigarette backwards, fell through a table, and I was eventually arrested. Now, in the show, I kind of skim over parts of the real arrest because they involve much deeper seated issues. But I ended up, everything else in that story is right in line, where I ended up in a mental hospital because they didn't have room in a rehabilitation center. So I got walked into a mental hospital and I walked to a back room, and they're introducing me. They, of course, take my shoelaces and, my belt so I don't get all Epstein. And I walked to the back room, and they introduced me to my roommate, and they're like, "This is Dave," and he asked me what I'm in for, and I told him the story, and I said, "Why are you here?" And he goes, "Oh, I'm a werewolf." And eventually, everything was fine for a couple of days, but one night he just started howling, and he ripped off his clothes, jumped on me, tried to attack me. I tried to grab a lamp that was sitting there, but then it turned out to be glued down. So I just had this naked kid trying to bite me and eat my face while his balls hit me. And then they came and they hit him in the ass with booty juice, which doesn't knock you out immediately. It's a tranquilizer. And but it's just enough to kind of stun him to at least realize there's other people in the room. And they dragged him off me. And after that, I ended up in a rehab for 30 days. And I tied it in with another story called The Penis Master, because what happened was I tried to I submitted 3 stories to the show, and they said, "We really want you to figure out a way to at least tell 2 of these." So they let me kind of sew 2 of them together and then have a similar ending where because I put a teacher in a mental hospital by drawing penises all over her classroom. This is honestly a true story.
It's like the Reader's Digest version of the true story.
It is, yes. So yeah, at the very end, it's it means in the 90s in a mental hospital in Detroit, a woman walked up to a young man and said, are you the penis master? And he's like, no, I'm a werewolf. And I was able to tie those two things together into making the full story. And I'm really proud of it because it's one of those stories where most of the comments are very positive, but you will get those comments going like fake. And the best part is it's not. It took me a long time to start being that brutally honest about my childhood and what I had been through to actually start telling these stories on stage. And that's why I'm so proud of that. And I'm glad that you found it.
That's why I have you here. So it's so unfair to make you tell that story that way, because it takes all the comedic juice out of it. It doesn't in any way highlight how flawlessly you land that story at the very end, where no, I'm a werewolf, and that just perfect landing. And I was just like, oh my gosh, the writing. And what happens, I think, with comics, and you're allowed to, every time I'm wrong, you can tell me. I won't believe you, but comics are accused of not really being writers, that you're just telling funny stories that you kind of remember, and that's what makes a comic, because we have that funny friend who could tell funny stories. And that doesn't give you any credit for the craft part of that. And then the other thing is that probably one of the hardest things in my mind in comedy, because I have no memory retention at all. Like if you gave me a line in a movie, it'd be like to be or line, not to be. Okay, got it. Right? That's me. You have to tell it as if it was the first time you ever told that story, even though that might have been in your best 5 minutes for like 10 years up to that point. I want to hear about that. I want to hear about the writer, Dave Landau, and kind of what it takes to put a story together.
You're right on both, actually. The first one is interesting because you do tell jokes for a long time, and you do. Anybody thinks they're a comic. That's the worst thing about being a comedian. Everybody thinks they're funny, so they assume it's just a guy talking. They don't think there's anything else behind it. When you can't play guitar, when you can't play piano, when you can't sing. But when it comes to actually, everybody on earth thinks they have the right to kind of judge exactly what you do because they can do what you do. And that's just part of it. It doesn't offend me. I'm just used to it. But the writing aspect of it is interesting because I went to high school for 5 years, and I was a drug addict and an Elkie, and I always was a reader. I just didn't want to read the Red Badge of Courage and Grapes of Wrath and other crap. I was reading Hunter S. Thompson and Carlos Castaneda and drug books that make me happy. And the writer really comes out where I used to write a lot of one-liners, and they would be somewhat based on truths and based on truths of society, whatever that might be. You find some sort of observation or you find something about yourself. But I always, even the stuff where I talk about my wife or a group of people, I always turn it back where I'm the asshole. I find that's the best. Sorry, are we allowed to swear? I should have asked.
Yeah, please.
Good, I thought you were. Okay.
No, this is Sinbad rules.
Yes, this is not the Cosby rules. We just get real filthy at the end. So I basically started writing longer stories because I wanted to write a book, and I just finished my book. And as I was starting to write a book a few years ago, I was just putting out what was my stories I was telling at parties, the secret things my friends knew about me. I had already done jokes about a breathalyzer being in my car and taking my mother-in-law to the airport, or my brother and I getting arrested for throwing cheeseburgers at a prostitute that ended up being an undercover cop when we were leaving a White Castle.
Oh, no.
So, I had these various stories, this whole weird life that I had lived that it wasn't weird to me because it was my life. And the more I talked about it, the more interested people were. So I slowly began to write out all these stories and tell them on stage. And I try to tell them with some level of quickness, but to put them on stage and try to be honest. And the more honest I can be, it seems, the more I connect with people. And that's when I started doing rehab shows, and I started doing recovery shows and all these other benefits. And people would come up to me after and say, I've also been through this. The number of people that are like, right when you said booty juice, I connected to the story. I stayed with a wolf kid, and it's crazy because so many people, especially now, deal with mental health. And
Right.
in my own life, my dad passed when I was young, so I have certain things with that. My mom committed suicide, so I know a lot about the struggles with mental health. So that's why I decided to start bringing my own and put it out there and just make jokes about the fact that, like, yeah, I was a drug addict trying to treat depression with LSD and and cocaine, and now I'm a grown man with a family and a child, and I'm happy. And I'm not happy every day or every second or even close, but I try. And through these stories, it helps.
Are you even a little bit? So I deal with clinical depression, and a couple of years ago, my shrink says to me, "Hey, there's some experimental stuff going on that I really think you might want to try, because like the mainstream antidepressant drugs also make you lose your sex drive." Which I said, "Well, I'd rather commit to suicide. That'd probably be better for me
Right.
If I'm not going to have sex." And he said, "Well, there's this crazy thing going around. And have you heard of a drug called ketamine?" And I was like, "No," because I was like the opposite of you. Like I didn't drink or do drugs until like, I was 20-ish and I started drinking like right before 21. Like,
Yes.
woo.
I got you. Yeah, I would have said yes, Special K. I have stories about that in my act. Yeah.
And you have stories in the wild, let's say. This guy was like, "Yeah, well, you go to the doctor's office, they hook you up to an IV drip, and it's pretty nuts." And so I was like, "Oh, I'm down for anything. I want to. Depression sucks.
This is the show all of us want to see, by the way. The way you say when you're hooked up to the thing. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I would. Yeah. For some reason, I do want to watch you do ketamine. Just
yes.
Because
Let's hit play on that one.
I'll tell you the one story that's worth thinking about from the second time I did it. I called my girlfriend at the time, and she goes, "I thought you were at the doctor's." "I am." She goes, "You should put your phone away." And I was like, "Not right now." And I said, "I just figured something out. I got to share it with you." I said, "The thumb is the daddy of all the fingers." And she's like, "Please put your phone away." And I'm like, no. Look, I'm trying to get sensation. And all I could see is that if I put my thumb against all these fingers, my thumb is registering the sense. It's only the thumb. He's the daddy. And so she draws like a smiley face on her thumb and puts it up to my camera phone. And I'm like, yes, just like that. And she's like, "Put your fucking phone away before you text somebody." And I'm like, okay. And the only other thing I remember from that session was thinking a little bit about Guns N' Roses music as the wall melted. And I was like, that stands to make sense. So anyway, I was going to ask you before I went into my own drug story, my one doctor assisted drug story. Do you find it interesting or odd that all of a sudden drugs like ketamine, mushrooms, MDMA are being brought in to treat depression? And does that make you go, "Well, what the hell? Like, why wasn't that around in the 90s?
Yeah. I actually bought a book. It was at an airport, and it was all about psilocybin and how that can be used to treat depression, LSD. And when I thought about it, when I was tripping my balls off, I really wasn't that depressed. I mean, it makes you laugh at everything. It makes you realize everything in the world is stupid. I mean, I loved it. Like, I've taken well over 350 hits of acid. I kind of ballparked it at, and I had a blast doing it. But I would also sell it, and then I would drip it onto sugar cubes when it was liquid, and then some would just spill on my hand, and it's like, all right, next 9 hours is not according to plan. And rave drugs were very popular when I was a senior in high school. So ketamine, Special K, it was more commonly a cat tranquilizer than the elephant one. But I remember, we had a thing called Toga Day, and I tell this story in my act, and you wear a toga, and I had a Burger King crown, and I stole liquor from a store, and it was one of those days, and I was just hammered.
One of those days like we've all had them.
Yeah. And I was driving around trying to find parties at like 2 p.m., which don't exist in life. So I kept pulling over and snorting ketamine off of a CD case while I was drunk. And then my car stalled in the middle of a road, which I didn't realize was in front of a police station, and I passed out. So I passed out in the street high on ketamine and drunk. I ended up getting arrested, and I was in jail. So I'm in a toga and a Burger King crown, being walked to the police station because I passed out right in front of it.
Gosh.
But the best part was I had the ketamine in this fifth pocket they didn't have. So once the cops left, I finished the bag of ketamine in the jail cell. But I do find it interesting because I look at it and I go, well, these weren't drugs that were addictive to me. Like I was a extreme alcoholic and I was very much a cokehead. And I was lucky enough not to get into heroin. And unfortunately, I've lost a lot of friends who have. And especially now with fentanyl, it's like I just tell people, I'm like, don't do coke, don't do heroin, don't, because you don't know what's in it. And but for me, LSD and it was freeing, honestly. And I hate to talk. The only reason why I don't do it is because I am in recovery.
Right.
But I really do believe when I read that it can help treat depression. I'm like, no, it makes perfect sense because you realize everything is stupid. It's like it's like getting to have George Carlin's brain for a few minutes and just realizing that everything you see is bullshit.
I had that realization without drugs. So.
Yeah, no, yeah, it took me a while, but I realized it too. Yeah.
What comes to mind when I think about this, and also just talking about your kind of experience as a writer and all that, and now, you know, married and a kid and all that, your act is still primarily recovery stuff, or how does that work for you? And then I guess my question is, at some point do you go, oh, I just want to start, you know, fresh page, kind of like the Netflix special mindset where you throw everything away that's after the Netflix special kind of a thing. Is that how your head works now, or how does that work with like your body of work?
What I do is I've written an act and I've always just added to it and subtracted from it. I don't do the thing where I create a new hour. That doesn't work with my brain. So what I do is I just write new stuff, add it in, take something out. Maybe I'll bring something old back in at another point. And right now with stories, I'm really trying to get more of those out there. So that's my main focus right now, is to put more of these stories out there. And it depends on the venue I'm doing. I mean, if I'm in the middle of the deep south and it's a bunch of drunk rednecks, I'm going to do all the dick jokes I have for 45 minutes. And then if I'm in a recovery group, I walk in and it's always funny because it's usually in a chapel where they cover up the cross, like with a tarp or something, like, oh, that'll make it so Jesus can't hear me.
Earmuffs.
Yeah, earmuffs, Lord. And then I tell my stories, and you can kind of go a different level because they want to hear anything that's just funny. They really do just want to hear something that just makes them laugh and makes them not feel like they're terrible people. And they don't judge you like other comedy crowds. You play for a room of Christians, they're going to judge you. You play for a room of addicts, a guy who's robbed his grandmother's diamond ring for opioids. He's not going to care what you say. What he cares if you say fuck. So it's nice and it's interesting you said earlier to make it sound fresh. That's something that I hate doing. So I try to switch around and improvise as much as possible when I'm on stage every night. I don't record it. I just play around when I can, just so it's, as long as something's coming fresh to me, the other stuff feels fresh, as opposed to trying to recite it word for word with a smile on my face.
Do you think about that while stuff's happening to you? Like, yeah, I need to write this down.
I do, and then I regret how I don't record it. And then sometimes I'll try to record it, and then there's no magic. So I'm sort of set in that mindset of, if I try to record it, I get nothing. If I don't, I'll get something. But I figure if it's good enough, it'll stay in my head. Is
your wife sometimes like, this cannot go in? Like when you have those conversations where something just happened, and she's like, no.
We had a bit where I talked about her giving birth, and right after she says, what does, my vagina look like? And I said, it looks like somebody kicked a hole in a pumpkin. And she said, please don't do that. And then I did it on television.
Of course.
So no, she doesn't care.
She said, you're not seeing this pumpkin again.
Yeah, she's like, this is my pumpkin. No longer a jack-o'-lantern. It is without holes for you.
There are all these, like, so I interview a lot of different people. I'm very fortunate to do that. And I interview like a lot of special operators. And so there's things you don't talk to military special operators about, like, what's it like to kill a guy? Like, that is never on the table. And it kind of goes around if you're that guy. And I think like with comics, that's the thing too. Like comics, I watch so many awful interviews with comedians that I'm just like, how would you ever say yes to press? because it's all the same things. Were you the class clown? You know, and all those kinds of things that are like, it's a trope in the reverse. It's like the worst of a trope. What though is the thing that I want to talk about or ask you about is comedians make even blacker humor than they could ever stay on a stage. And it's just never going to get talked about kind of in the wild the way it is, you know, amongst yourselves. What is that like now? Like what's 2020? Like I've listened to a couple of your podcast episodes. Feels like you forget there's people in the room sometimes. What's this world like right now for you?
You know exactly what that's like, Chris, but Dave, take it.
It's, you know, I want to say it's difficult, but at this point, I say if you're not getting canceled as a comedian, you're probably not doing it right. Everything is just offensive to everybody, so go ahead, cancel me. We've all said stuff that's off color. We've all made jokes that could be described as whatever ism you want to put on or call it phobic or whatever. Everything that I've said I make is a joke. If anybody wants to interpret it differently, that's up to them. But I feel the comedy is it's what I say. It's not your interpretation of it. It's what I meant by it, and that's all that it's ever meant from the moment it left my mouth. It's not what you get to bastardize it into and say that I meant by it. So frankly, I don't care. And I'm lucky because with the Anthony Cumia show he was one of the first people to get canceled. And I ended up on a show with him and Artie Lang. So it was the Artie Lang show, Artie and Anthony with Dave Landau. And those are two guys who do not give a fuck. So I got to sit there and say whatever I want as a joke, and it's always been funny. We try to say the worst things possible to make each other laugh, and our fan base appreciates it because we're literally doing something nobody else is doing. We have to stay behind a paywall because of it, because it's very hard to get somebody to be like, yeah, we'll sponsor that. But we can also have these brutally honest conversations at times. It's like you said, like we had Ryan O'Neal's come on, the guy who killed bin Laden. And that was where I got to even ask him, I go, so like right when you shot him, because he was so famous, was it like meeting Tom Hanks for a second where you're like, wow, it's you? And then you just shot him in the face. Like, I like that you can just ask stuff like that. And we can go a little bit over the edge in that sense.
Oh my gosh.
And I love being able to do that because gallows humor, dark humor, black humor is the way that I have dealt with depression. I have dealt with anything at all through my entire life, and I've done it to myself. You know, I had talked about my mom's suicide, and she had attempted suicide right after my son was born. And then she asked if she could babysit, and I was like, well, no. I'm like, because if you hang yourself, if you're gonna hang yourself, you might have to do it from the ceiling fan. So he's got a mobile while we're gone. It's like, can I take him for a ride? It's like, yeah, as long as you open the garage, you know. Right. So it's like I turned such a sad thing into something that I had to use comedy to deal with it.
It's very Scottish.
Yeah, it is. I think I might have Scottish blood in me. I don't know. I know for sure I'm Irish and Italian, but I have a Jewish last name. So along the lines of like divorces and adoptions and stuff, I have no clue really what I am.
Fearsome combination.
Yeah, I'm just some mutt.
What's the difference between, you know, people that think they're funny and they're funny to like their friends versus someone who can do this for a living and entertain a room full of really diverse people with completely different senses of humor and backgrounds and everything else?
That's interesting because it's bringing them into your world. And what I like about my act is when I talk about going down to the ghetto and going to get weed and stuff in the 90s, the black people erupt because I start doing bird call noises and I start doing stuff that's very sort of their community. So if you're willing, so that's just an example of like an audience member. When you start doing stuff about different groups of people and then you take your perspective on it, it's very easy for them to enter your world because they get that you have this understanding of it and it's just your viewpoint of it. So it's all about bringing them into your world and having them see it through your eyes is the way that I would say it. And the difference is like you would ask the class clown question, and it's the same answer I give whenever I'm asked is the class clown was the kid who was always making jokes, but the real class clown was the dropout who was getting thrown out of every class and lighting off fireworks. And like, that's the comic. That's the guy that's the funny guy. The class clown was the one who was accepted by the teacher.
Yeah, the one who needs the extra love, the one who's like doing it for pure feedback as opposed to being willing to make jokes at their own deadly expense, you know.
Right.
That's
And yeah, and I think its vulnerability is also another key to it. When you allow
huge.
yourself to be a punching bag and to open yourself up, and in that way, that brings in the audience, and you don't have vulnerability right away. That's why when you see a lot of open micers go on stage and they're like, so I was eating this girl out, and you're like, oh, stop. And you've all seen it. Anytime you've been to an open mic, it's just one after another, and it's because they don't have any vulnerability. They don't understand that that's the key ingredient to being a great comic. And if you look at Richard Pryor, he's a prime example of it. He's telling you about his addictions, lighting himself on fire. You look at Chris Titus, the stuff he's talked about in his act. You look at Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers was one of the first people to ever go as dark as she did. And look at how far she came at a time where women were not accepted the way that they are now. And I mean, she was guest hosting the Tonight Show. She was fearless, and that's another element as well. And to have fearlessness and vulnerability mixed so well, like they did with Joan Rivers, that's again another ingredient to be a great comic.
I feel like the comics that I resonate with the most are the ones who are like a Judd Apatow level of obsession about comics. You know, his story about like going in, like whatever, he was like super low age. He was like age 9 or something, convincing people that he worked for a radio station, and he was like getting interviews from people out from Long Island. People who saw Joan Rivers' incredible card catalog of index cards that she had written out since like the 50s and stuff. And you nerd about it. You're like, oh my gosh, would I love to ruffle those decks just a little bit? Like, Are you that guy, or are you, you just had to turn your stories into this?
I'm not in the obsessive card catalog. I've never seen anything like that. When I saw that in the documentary, where I was like, this is the largest library in the world, of just jokes she's told. No, but I have stacks and stacks of notebooks. Colin Quinn's a lot like that, just a house of notebooks, I have a lot of notebooks, but a lot of the stuff also stays in my head, especially with the stories. So what I have to do is I have to get up on stage and work out the stories that I know from my life and just kind of see what hits and where it hits and why it hits, because it's already in here. I don't have to necessarily write it out. It's just finding the right punchlines and the right way to end it, because you can have the best story in the world, but sometimes stories just end with, and that's it. You have to figure out, figure out a way to make it boom at the end. And that's not the easiest thing to do, especially when the funniest part is in the meat of the story.
Right.
So how do you do that then? How do you engineer it to move some of that pop to the end where you need it?
Well, for example, in the White Castle bit, I talk about how we get arrested for throwing cheeseburgers. My brother was drunk, and we're pulling out of a White Castle on 8 Mile in Detroit at 3 a.m. and we ordered a crave case, which is a briefcase of hamburgers. And he sees the streetwalker and he starts hucking cheeseburgers at her, and he's just yelling like, "How much for a hand job, pap?" And she pulls out her badge, and the way that I make it work is I say, in court, I'll never forget the look on my dad's face when the prosecuting attorney read, "Would you blow us both for extra cheese?" And then that has this eruption to where it ends, which is, it is what happened. But it's like trying to figure out in the exact, because Wayne County, Detroit, it's basically you have this Def Jam audience, for lack of a better term, and they're all in court waiting to see a judge, and they're trying not to laugh because they're there for a reason. But now they're reading off a transcript of what somebody said to an undercover prostitute. And eventually the bailiff started laughing. The whole room started laughing. The judge started laughing. Everyone was laughing
Except your dad.
Yeah, well, my dad and the arresting officer. And and he basically said, "Look, I can't charge them with soliciting sex. I mean, why didn't we charge him with assault or underage drinking? He wasn't soliciting sex. He's just throwing cheeseburger. He's like, just get out of my courtroom." And and we got very lucky in that sense. but yeah, that's how I had to find the thing that makes it end. Sometimes it's just a simple thing like that where, okay, that's so funny. You don't have to go past it now. Everybody gets the story. I don't have to explain. My dad was very upset. You get it. He was pissed, embarrassed. The whole thing was a nightmare. But years later, it's so funny to look back on.
Things you don't think you're going to have to say as a parent. Don't chuck cheeseburgers at whores. Stop it.
Especially if they're cops.
Stop
Cop
it.
whores are the
Cop
worst.
whores.
Tragedy plus time. Cop whores are the worst would be a good shirt for your merch, Dave. The thing, Jack Vincent's question is a good one. He says, can you have a story with lots of funny stuff in the middle, but that end with some level of depth without the big laugh? I don't know. When I hear that question, all I immediately go right to is Nanette, which I know ripped comedy. There was nothing but comedians talking about Hannah Gadsby's Nanette as, is this comedy? Is this whatever? And all that. So I'm curious to know your take because I feel like Nanette was a performance piece and not stand-up, but that's fine. But I'm curious to know your take, and I'm curious to know how you think of Jack's thing about, can you be funny in the middle but end with some depth?
You can. It's interesting with it. Look at Hannah Gadsby at the Apollo. It's one of my favorite videos ever that somebody cut two together. So it's a very interesting take of, look, I'm not trashing anything that she did, but
Sure.
it's not stand-up comedy. It was a
Right.
spoken word piece. It was a 1-hour spoken word piece that was put into a stand-up comedy category done by a stand-up comic. That's not to take anything else from her,
Right.
but the way I saw it was like, this is your fuck you to comedy, and then you left, or was supposed to, and then it took off huge, and but you absolutely can, but not really in a comedy club setting, because it almost comes off to me as pandering, because at the end you kind of go, and that's when I realized I needed help, and then you have people clapping. It just feels almost fraudulent. I think the idea of getting a huge laugh out of something while making that exact same point makes it true stand-up comedy. I think when you don't do that, it makes it more of a spoken word sort of a category.
I like that answer a lot. And it made me think of Jeselnik, Anthony Jeselnik, who's one of my favorites right now, just insofar as, his delivery style, his method, his work. I don't know if you've worked with him or know him or hate him, or everybody's equally.
No, I like him. I like him. I've only met him once, but I think he's brilliant, and I think he's a really nice guy.
He says that one of the number one things that he runs into all the time, especially when someone tries to convince him to do another show, like the Jeselnik Offensive, but like a show, like a sitcom, is they want him to take the pressure valve off his joke. I'm not really this guy. And he says, that's the point of the joke. The point of the joke is an onslaught of this character that I'm playing as Anthony Jeselnik. I can't diffuse that bomb, or it's not funny anymore. Do you get that in your circles? Is that a conversation?
You definitely do, where now Jimmy Carr is a good example of kind of what Jeselnik does.
Yes.
Dave Attell is a great bar comic, but he's also morbid.
Yes.
But you look at Jeselnik, and everything's going to be, it's murder, rape, pedophilia, whatever it is. But that's what makes it funny, is he's taking the teeth out of something so taboo and so gross in society that's what makes Anthony Jeselnik Anthony Jeselnik. To take that element out of it would mean he's not famous. He's not well known. He never got good at what he did, because the way that he got known is because he sharpened that craft. And telling somebody to take that element out of who they are is the dumbest thing imaginable. It's why when Anthony wrote for Fallon, it didn't work out after a year, because you have Anthony Jeselnik trying to write for arguably the softest human being in the history of comedy. And that's not a knock on Jimmy. That's just his style.
Right.
So it makes no sense to tell somebody to lose what makes them great.
Have you ever bombed? Does every comic have to bomb at least once and possibly several times?
Yeah, many times.
What's your ratio of bomb to win?
Well, what's the worst bombing experience where while it's happening, you're hyper aware of it and you're like, this one's bad, as bombings go?
Now it's kind of hard to, because I have too much fun. So if I'm at a casino in the middle of nowhere eating it, I'll just start making fun of people till they're leaving and I'm having fun. It's more like I'm making the audience bomb. but it
That's
takes a
Terry's
long
dream,
time.
by the way.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. At some point, you just have to go. I know I'm good at this. I get paid, so you're wrong. But when you start, you really are. You aren't great. And I'd say the worst experience wasn't even a bomb because there's been so many. It's hard to say. I mean, you get to certain situations where they put you. It makes no sense. Like the first time I ever hosted a show, I walk into a sports bar during the World Series, and everybody's wearing jerseys of the teams, and the guy goes, "We're just going to shut off the TV shortly and start comedy night." And I said, I don't think you should do that. Probably wait till the game's over. And he's like, no, I've been advertising comedy night. I'm like, I think that might be a bad idea. So he shuts off all the TVs and the whole place is booing. And then I go up on stage. I'm like, hey, everybody. And a bottle just wings by my head and shatters on the wall behind me. And I just said, good night, everybody. And I just walked off stage.
I was just wondering if you're going to play Stand By Your Man 20 times in a row right at that moment.
Yeah, that would, just have if we only had the chicken wire, that would have made it a lot
The
better.
chicken wire would have made it okay. God, what a deep cut. I want to know out of anybody who's even still here, like who got that dumb reference. But anyway, I have one last question, then I'm going to cut you free. The point of the show in a lot of ways is what can we stick in the backpack to give people something for their own world? And clearly there's a lot of people that are finding it, Jack considers himself funny. That's the worst way to say it. Jack is funny and he's a pro speaker. I'm a pro speaker. What I always say is that the difference is I can be speaker and somewhat funny, but to really do it, real like straight up comedy, I couldn't, just because so many people can't.
It's the same as hotness. Like I'd be hot in like a insurance seminar, but you go to like Comic-Con, a lot less hot. It's all relative. You're funny for a speaker.
Your cosplay scale.
Yeah.
I'm a Michigan 6, but a Los Angeles 2. I get it.
I know that feeling. Oh my God, never go to LA. But the question I have, I guess, is what gives there's baby Jesus. Somebody gave him gold, frankincense, and myrrh, and Dave's coming and dropping that. This is what you get. This is your power that I'm going to bestow upon you. What's the nugget they need? What do they have to take in their backpack?
Empathy is definitely one of them, because you have to be able to put yourself into other people's shoes to make them realize how you wear yours. I'm going to say vulnerability, like I said earlier. I think that's extremely important. And fearlessness are the three things that I think are the main ingredients that make a good comic. And I think that goes for speakers. I think that goes for a lot of people in any of their fields. All three of those things are human. And I think that's the most important thing. And I think people connect with somebody based on on that very human level.
Circle back for just a quick second on fearlessness. That's easy to do when you are drunk and high and everything. Sober Dave had to really work hard to be fearless. What was that like? What was the climb?
Extremely difficult, because I could at least have one or two comfort beers before I went on stage. Now, I will claim that I never went on stage drunk, but then I have club owners like, you don't remember your late shows? So I really don't remember. But going on stage the first couple times was extremely difficult because I did not have that comfort. And eventually, once I got good and I realized, oh, I'm better like this, that's when I started to actually be able to build that fearlessness back up, because frankly, I was pretty afraid without having something to take away the anxiety.
It's a big feeling. It's a big feeling. Well, there we did. I just did what Jack Vincent wanted us to do, was just end on some kind of learning note. I didn't mean to do that, but no. Had to happen.
You don't have to admit that stuff. You could be like, yes, I nailed it. That's exactly how I planned it.
Landed it. Dave Landau, thank you so much for saying yes. It's always a dodgy thing to talk to random strangers on the internet and, go on their video show a week later. So thank you for saying yes and coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Carrie, as always, thank you. Listen, everybody knows how this works. I mean, I think I just have to